During his first press conference since the recent murder of 6 hostages held captive by Hamas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said yesterday he is committed to seeing the return of the remaining 101, but made clear that Hamas is the one that has refused to accept a hostage and ceasefire deal. He also said it is illogical and insane for Israel to make more concessions when the only thing that Hamas has done is murder more hostages.
They murdered 6 of our hostages in cold blood. Now the world will seriously demand that Israel make concessions after this massacre? What message does this send to Hamas? I'll tell you what the message is. Murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions. That's not only illogical, it's not only immoral, it's downright insane.
So how has the murders over the weekend changed the outlook of the Israel-Hamas war? Joining me now from Jerusalem to discuss it is Chris Mitchell. He's the Middle East Bureau Chief at CBN News. Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you, Joseph.
Now, first, on a personal note for you, you attended the Shiva of the father and mother of Hersh Goldberg Poland. He was one of the hostages found murdered by Hamas only a few days ago. How are they doing? How are the developments like these impacting the situation there in Israel?
Well, like you can imagine, they're just in deep grief and anguish. The Shiva, as you said, and the Shiva is what the Jewish people do, the tradition, sitting Shiva for 7 days after the death of a loved one. We were talking about that earlier. It's a very healing time, and this is a remarkable Shiva. Literally hundreds of people were there today. It will end Sunday morning, and over the time, there'll be thousands of people that will come to sit down and just briefly express their condolences to Rachel and John Goldberg Poland. They really, and Hersh in many ways, has become the poster child for the hostages. They had been literally here in Israel, in the United States, and wherever they could to plead for the safe rescue of Hersh Goldberg, a young 23-year-old Israeli who really captured the hearts of many people. We were able to sit down with them just briefly, tell them that we've been praying for them, as well as millions of people around the world. And it really does speak to the anguish that the Israeli people have gone through, especially in the last few days when these 6 Israelis were murdered and an Israeli American as Hersh. Really just almost a year now, these people have been in horrific conditions, tortured, and then finally these 6 were executed. 101 remain, but of those, maybe 1/3 they realize are dead. So it speaks to the anguish of the Israeli people, but also the resilience. That despite all the things that are going on, and earlier today we talked to CEO of Our Crowd, John Medved, and talking about despite the fact that Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, these groups and organizations want to destroy Israel, he was making the point, but despite that, for thousands of years, groups like that, and some much better than those organizations, have tried to destroy the Jewish people. They failed, and that speaks to the resilience of the Jewish people and the state of Israel.
Yeah, Chris, for most of us, the conflict there in Israel is news and headlines and somewhat distant. But when you attend the Shiva of the parents of someone who's lost a son as a hostage, you realize how personal this is for so many people there. Now, at the top of the segment, I played part of Benjamin Netanyahu's comments from his press conference about how Israel should respond. Tell us a bit more about that. What do you think his posture is? What will the result of this be?
Well, his posture is being resolute against the demands of Hamas. Hamas, since the beginning of the negotiations, has had 2 main goals. First of all, they want the end of the war. They want the IDF to stop the war, and they want all the withdrawal of all the IDF troops. Now, to an Israeli point of view, and especially to Prime Minister Netanyahu and the coalition government right now, that means a defeat for Israel and a victory for Hamas, that it would survive and that it would be able to rearm and regroup. One of the main points he was making last night, Joseph, was the fact that there's a very strategic piece of land on the Egyptian-Gazan border. They call it the Philadelphia corridor. And that's where they've discovered more than 150 smuggling tunnels. And actually, it was right near there where they found these 6 Israelis that were executed. This has been the oxygen allowing Hamas to arm itself and become what some people have called the largest terror base in the world. Now that those tunnels have been discovered, uncovered, many or most of them destroyed, Israel maintains that it needs to control this land to make sure that Israel does not rearm and regroup. There's a lot of pressure for Israel to get out of that place, but Netanyahu, by using a map and talking about the history of the place, believes that Israel needs to stay there to maintain security in Gaza and for Israel itself.
Israel has long maintained since October 7th that their goal in this conflict is not merely to reach a ceasefire, but to eliminate Hamas. How close are they to that objective? Does that remain the goal?
It does remain the goal, not only to destroy Hamas as a fighting force, but also make sure that Hamas can no longer govern the area called Gaza and Gaza Strip. They are close to that goal. Rafah was the last main stronghold that Hamas remained, and they have degraded or destroyed most of the 24 battalions of Hamas. There do remain pockets of resistance in northern Gaza, for example, but it is getting closer to, making sure that military.
Looks like we may have lost Chris there for a moment, and what he was they're speaking about the ability of the Israeli government and their success in the effort to eliminate Hamas rather than just to negotiate some kind of ceasefire with them. We'll see if we have Chris Mitchell back. Of course, he's coming to us from Israel, and there are communication challenges when you talk to people on the other side of the world, and it sounds like we have him back. Chris, do we have you?
Yeah, we do. We do, Justin.
Okay. Great to have you back. And you were just closing your thoughts there on how close Israel is to their goal of actually eliminating Hamas.
It is closer and very close to eliminating Hamas as a military fighting force and as an organization that would be able to govern Gaza once again. Those are the two main goals, as well as rescuing or getting the hostages back. What remains, Joseph, is a much greater threat to Israel is Hezbollah on the northern border. And just this past month in August, there's been more than 1,000 rockets fired by Hezbollah. Once Gaza will no longer be a threat to Israel, that will be the next much greater challenge to Israel.
Now, Chris, the story of the newly murdered hostages has grabbed the headlines over the last several days. But somewhat ironically, and Netanyahu referred to this in his press conference, it seems that the response from the global community has been not more pressure on Hamas, but more pressure on Israel to reach a ceasefire. Is that a fair characterization, and why would that be?
It is a fair characterization, and I think that's been the story of much of the war since October 7th, is that Israel is the one being put pressure on rather than Hamas. There are two kind of slogans about the hostages that relate to that. One is bring them back home, which really puts the onus on Israel, but let them go puts the onus on Hamas. And ironically, much of the world puts the pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, on the current coalition government. And yet there are nations like Egypt and Qatar in particular that have been aiding Hamas. Egypt because of the many tunnels on from its sovereign territory that go into Gaza, and Qatar, which has been funding to the tune of billions of dollars for the last 17 years since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip. And those are the ones that are actually part of the negotiating team. So many people say, put the pressure on Hamas, put the pressure on Qatar, and put the pressure on Egypt and not Israel.
Now, Chris, you say there that Egypt has been aiding Hamas through this series of tunnels. Now, of course, in the past, there have been tunnels connecting Gaza to Israel as well. And that was, of course, not an attempt of the Israeli government to aid Hamas. That was just something that Hamas had built. To what extent is the aid that's been coming from Egypt official or incidental just because of their geography and Hamas's ability to extract aid on their own?
Well, it doesn't seem to be official, Joseph, but in fact, a top Egyptian general was up on the Gaza border right now. They too are trying to put pressure on Israel to withdraw from that area. But it's hard to imagine Egypt having more than 150 tunnels in its right along the Egyptian-Gazan border and not know what was happening. There are some who speculate that many of the Egyptian generals or officials could have been complicit, or at least turn a blind eye to what was happening for many, many years. Some of these tunnels, vehicles could drive through. And as I said before, many people said these tunnels were the oxygen that allowed Hamas to arm itself and during the war to rearm itself until Israel was able to take control of this strategic area called the Philadelphia Corridor.
Chris Mitchell, Middle East Bureau Chief at CBN News. We greatly appreciate your updates and your vigilance on tracking this story, and we're all better for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph.